Okay, hi, I'm back. So we're going to talk about part one of this book, The Ancient World. This is the book I'm looking at, and it's just the first book that I picked up when I started doing my research. So I thought I'd show you a couple things. The other thing I thought might be interesting to people is if you watch YouTube at all, and I don't do TikTok or I don't look at much social media, but I do see on YouTube a lot of Anunnaki stuff. So what this chapter is about is Mesopotamia civilization, and it's going to talk about the Sumerians, which is where the Anunnaki thing came from. And it'll give you a foundation for that, as well as let you see some of the foundational civilizations for creating the Bible. And I'm going to read for the most part because I don't want to mess it up, but I'll probably end up getting off track and adding some stuff. But okay, so one of the principal centers of early human civilization was Mesopotamian Valley, or modern Iraq. Lying between the Tigris and Euphrates River, which began in the mountains of the Armenia and flow into the Persian Gulf, Mesopotamia is a fertile region well suited to agriculture. And in the last tape, we talked about the importance of agriculture, both for every reason, for health, for mental, for subsistence, for civilization to thrive, everything. The earliest known settlers in Mesopotamia built their villages around 7000 BC and were a people of unknown ethnic origin. So it's interesting. It says they possessed a primitive Neolithic culture and practiced a rudimentary agriculture. Sometime between 5000 and 4000 BC, the Sumerians, an Indo-European people, conquered the Tigris-Euphrates Valley, which it says originating in India. The Indo-Europeans were ancestors of the modern Europeans. The Sumerians founded Mesopotamia's first major civilization. So these are the people that had the cuneiform writing, which is the web shape. And I've still got a lot of questions like, what made them, they were highly advanced, evidently. What gave them the forethought to put things in mud, or was that their only form of writing material? Because they wrote also on skins and things like that. Maybe they knew they needed to preserve the info. So Sumer, 4000 or 2350 BC to 4000 BC, right? More than any other people, the Sumerians shaped the civilization of Mesopotamia. They lived in numerous and independent city-states, which were united only for military. Each city-state was ruled by a patesi, who combined the powers of a high priest, commander-in-chief of the army, and a regulator of the irrigation system. 3 things. Often the rulers of the more powerful city-states would seek to expand their power by conquering the neighboring cities, and so civil strife was frequent. It wasn't until 2000 BC that the Sumerian city-states were united under a single ruler. Commerce. While agriculture was the basis of the Sumerian economy, commerce was raised to a high art. Sumerian temples exercised the greatest economic power. They were economies, temples back then. They owned large tracts of land and operated numerous commercial enterprises. All farm produce was shipped to the temples and then released to the people. So it was all about all people, the temples were. In time of famine, Grain stored in temple granaries provided the populace with food. Temples were semi-communistic institutions which served as welfare agencies of a sort, relieving economic hardship. While Sumer, I was weeding this morning and one of my stalks from my plant went right in my eye, so my eyes are a little blurry. Excuse me. The temples were, okay, I read that. Talked about that. While Sumer was a slave society, slavery was not the institution that it would later become. Slaves back that time may have been poor, but they could have property, they could have a mortgage, they could pay debt, and that kind of thing. So it wasn't so bad, and they could also marry and enjoy citizenship. In order to facilitate commerce, it says the Sumerians invented many of the basic techniques of our modern business. Hard to believe, huh? Way back then? They had written contracts, bills of trade, sales, lading, credits, invoices, sales receipts, so many other things. They were highly advanced. Writing itself was invented about 3000 BC as a means of keeping business records. So business was way up there. And it had to be when you get a big group of people like that. So we know that there were civilizations that existed before Sumeria, or, well, definitely before, all over, even in the Americas. But at this point, that was the first form of written language that we know of. So the religion was polytheistic. Why can't I say that word? Anyway, they worshipped many gods and goddesses, right? And a variety. Mostly, their worship was based on nature, which I think almost every civilization starting out uses myth or religion or story to be able to explain phenomena that's unexplainable, like an eclipse, or the stars not being there, or the moon changing, etc., right? Or a storm or a flood. So they need a god to blame it on. So their gods in Sumer became, anthropomorphic. Part god, part human. Or a god with human characteristics. So they also had good and evil gods called monism. Shamash was the sun god, Enlil, the god of wind and rain, Ishtar, the goddess of fertility. Now, according to the religion, the god Marduk, maybe you've heard of that, rebelled against the gods who created him and made the world out of the body of one of his slain fellow gods. Just a little excerpt. If you watch Mud Fossils, and I think you should, what's the guy's name? Roy, is it? I like him a lot. I think that's his name. Anyway, it's Mud Fossils University. He talks about how our geology is biology and proves it. Shows you the DNA in the rocks. Mind-blowing stuff. But now think about that. He said, according to Sumerian religion, the god Marduk rebelled against the gods who had created him and made the world out of the body of one of his slain fellow gods. That would fit right in. This isn't the first time that history says that the earth is made out of the fallen. Okay, so Marduk created man out of clay and the blood of dragons in order that he would have servants. What do you think about leaders that create or program life under them to be servants? Pretty typical, isn't it? How come we forget it when it comes to us? We just don't see ourselves. We only see from one side of the picture. The Sumerians had no clear conception of an afterlife. Sheol was their concept of where the dead went, and it was a dark and ugly place, and ghosts and ghouls lingered there before you disappear forever. The Sumerian law, what was codified, the word codified means written down, their laws were known to all and fairly enforced, and they had some really pretty advanced stuff. So the basic characteristics of their legal system were, like Hammurabi, an eye for an eye. Here's the clincher, though. They never considered intent. So if you murdered someone and it was really no fault of your own, you were still going to pay the same as if you had intentionally slaughtered him. It was flat, clean, and simple, an eye for an eye. So easy to police, right? The division of the population had three different sections. Unequal social classes, obviously. Nobles and priests, right, at the top. Burghers and commoners in the middle. And serfs and slaves. So the ones at the top, obviously, were the ones who punished crimes and who ran everything. The middle guys were really the people who marketed and sold stuff, blah, blah, blah. And then the slaves were the slaves. So a crime against a noble would require more punishment, though, than a crime against a slave. Okay. So great privileges of the higher-ups brought them great responsibility, or great responsibility brought them great privilege. Some of us never had that chance, huh? Okay, so the administration of justice was semi-private. The wrong person would bring the wrongdoer. They'd both go before the justice, and there'd be a referee, and arrest the culprit if there was one. Sumerian law failed to distinguish between accidental and intentional homicide, like I said. So any homicide was treated like premeditated murder. Okay, so their culture, the supreme achievement, I said they were really advanced, everything I've ever read, was the development of the cuneiform writing in 3000 BC. It's a wedge-shaped character, formed pictographs, and each pictograph represented an idea or a thought, not so much a thing, but a thought. Gradually, the picture or the pictograph came to be idealized, so instead of a picture representing an idea, it was a symbol. Okay, the symbols developed into the first alphabets. So writing was huge. It allowed them to communicate with people far off and all kinds of things. It allowed them to start keeping records of people who were born and blah, blah, blah. Important, right? Otherwise, all you have is archaeology, and whoever really knows about that, sometimes it has integrity, sometimes not. So the high point of Sumerian literature was, and you've probably heard of this, the Epic of Gilgamesh. And included in that is a creation story. It chronicled the exploits of a legendary king Sumerian tales like the Epic of the Flood found their way into the literature of the Hebrews and the Greeks. That's where we get a lot of our stories. In mathematics, Sumerians developed processes of multiplication and division, learned square and cube roots, and their calendar was based on